All right, thank you guys for coming, and welcome back to week 3 of Fierce Words for Frightened People. I woke up, I guess it was like Tuesday morning, and I thought to myself, oh, this would have been a much better title. I was thinking, if I do this again, the title will be Father Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Book of Revelation. So lots of options here. So just a reminder, we'll get to this in a second, but we are recording this. The way that the cameras are set up, no one's faces are involved, but people's voices are present. If you have any concerns about that, just let me know and we'll try to edit around that. All right. So here we are, week 3. I'm calling it the Secret Decoder Ring. So hopefully by the end of the day today, we'll have, the table will be completely set, the toolbox will be full, all of our metaphors will be mixed, so we'll be ready to go. I've been getting some feedback from folks, and I'm really grateful for that. So I've changed around the kind of format for how we're doing this, so that we are actually going to start digging into the text a little bit more. That means that we're going to be, we may actually have more space to do kind of more text. So the exact layout of how we're going to do stuff may shift over the next 3 weeks, because we may actually cover a little bit more ground today. All right, let's dig into this. Already did the recording reminder? Great. There we are, we're in the Secret Decoder Ring. Okay, so it's not exactly a code. One of the there was a school of thought looking at the book of Revelation to say he was writing in a code. And the idea was that, that there were Roman censors. It was some sort of Hogan's Heroes kind of scenario, and he had to sneak this text out. That's absolutely not the case. He's utterly transparent about what he's doing. That said, he uses a lot of coded language. And there's so much of it, and it's so dense and stacked together that the temptation actually is to try to tease it all out and to figure out, to kind of unlock it. In fact, there's one of the books that I was pointed to it's actually called Unlocking the Code. I actually don't think that's super helpful. I think there's a part about where once you begin to understand the kind of the lexicon of images, you can just allow them to work on you without necessarily knowing every little bit and piece. Part of the problem actually is also that we don't actually have we don't know all of the references. Hey, Annie, there's packets are right behind you over there. Great. All right, so I'm told that there is a difference between a lexicon and a dictionary. A dictionary is a list of words, but a lexicon can be a dictionary of images or ideas or concepts. So what we're actually really going to look at today is the contours of the lexicon of images and references that John uses. Again, if I haven't sold you on the idea that John is a very sophisticated writer, by the end of the day, I would be shocked if you're not sold on this. Now, part of this whole project is predicated on the idea that there is kind of no true division between the spiritual and the physical, and that what happens in the sort of spiritual dimension impacts the physical and vice versa. The kind of close division of the physical and the spiritual is really an inheritance of kind of Enlightenment thought. And it's really difficult for me, I suspect it's difficult for most of us to kind of crack out of that worldview to begin to imagine a different way of thinking about things. So from that perspective, the symbols that John uses both represent a reality and actually are the reality, because he's moving into the spiritual register whereby that spiritual reality is made present. And then the meaning is actually created by squashing all of these images and symbols and ideas together, often in ways that are paradoxical. And this brings us back to that idea of John creating a metaphoric worldview, where he just simply asserts that two things are true at the same time, and it's up to our feeble little brains to try to draw the connections between them. So, we're actually going to, in the interest of kind of doing things a little bit differently, we're going to start out with a brief reading. And so if you are comfortable just listening and allowing it to kind of work over you, you can just go ahead and listen. If you really do want to follow along in the packet with the readings with the translation, we're going to start with chapter. If you want this, here you go. You have that. It's going to be chapter 5, verse 1.
Then I saw on the right hand of the one seated on the throne a scroll with writing inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaim with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" But there was no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth to open the scroll or to look inside it. And I wept bitterly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look inside it. But one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. The Lion from the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has won the right to open the scroll and its 7 seals." Then I saw between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders a lamb, standing as though it had been slain. He had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into the world. Then he went and took the scroll from the right hand of the one seated on the throne. And as he took the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each had a harp, and they held golden bowls full of incense, the prayers of God's people. And they sang a new song. "You are worthy to take the scroll and break its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you bought for God those of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. You have made them a royal house of priests for our God, and they shall reign on earth." As I looked, I heard the voice of many angels round about the throne, and the living creatures and the elders, myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands, proclaiming with a loud voice, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth, wisdom and might, honor and glory and blessing." Then I heard all the creatures in heaven, under the earth, and in the sea crying, "Blessing and honor, glory and might to the one seated on the throne and to the Lamb forever and ever."
Just as a side note, I absolutely love this little image. I love John over on the left-hand side. And you see his face just kind of squashed through the little hole, seeing everything. I think it's hilarious. It's just one of the reasons why we're using it. For a second. Uh-oh. My PowerPoint seems to be crashing, so give me a second. So the next piece what we're going to look at is just sort of a picture of a filing cabinet. It's one way of sort of thinking about what John is doing here. Just one moment. Hopefully we can get this back. Thank you for your patience. Okay. So first, we're going to look at numbers, the sort of the cabinet of all the different numbers. Then we're actually going to dig into some concepts of kind of floating around in the kind of philosophical system of the day. And that's going to be looking at the four humors, the way that they show up here, their connection to the four elements or five elements, which we may or may not get to the fifth element, how this relates to his use of color and how color actually appears as a set. And then there's a really important but very broad kind of miscellaneous set of images that John comes back to over and over again. And then we're going to, the kind of the key piece here is to end with some shared stories. If we have some time, we want to look at gemstones and how they're used and their role in imagery. And finally, looking at the cosmology kind of hiding behind this. That'll actually come full circle back to some of the other pieces we're talking about. So numbers, not just for math anymore. Numbers stand for things. So the key numbers that keep showing up over and over again in the book of Revelation are 3, 4, 7, 6, lesser extent 8. We don't see 8 a whole lot, but that's an important number. And then 10, 12, and then thousands and tens of thousands. So the number 3 represents perfection. And we all know that heaven is perfect. And we all know that, and this is a very important thing to note, that in heaven, God's will is always happening. So therefore, it's perfect. So why is 3 the number of perfection? So, and this begins to sort of bleed over into kind of Pythagorean and Neo-Pythagorean kind of philosophical thought. So you've got 3 is a triangle. You've got 3 points. So you can always draw a triangle. But every triangle can be circumscribed by a circle. And a circle is the perfect shape. The circle is a perfect shape because it has no corners, it has no edges. They were clever back then. They knew that circles were interesting. They knew that arches could withstand enormous amounts of pressure. They knew that that there were interesting relationships and ratios between the diameter of the circle and the circumference of the circle. All this stuff was part of their understanding. Here's just another one so you can see I'm not making it up. Every triangle can be circumscribed. So 3 is the number of perfection. 4 is the number of imperfection, because 4 is this world. So you've got the 4 corners of the earth, the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 winds. The 4 winds, I believe, showed up a lot last week. Lots of winds everywhere. We've got 4 seasons. We've got 4 elements. We've got 4 humors. We even have 4 rivers flowing from the Garden of Eden. 4, 4, 4. Whenever you see 4, we're talking about here. We're talking about the here and now. So 7 is the number of completeness and fullness. Well, why is that? It's because 3 plus 4 equals 7. So if you've got perfection plus imperfection, you've got everything. Heaven plus earth equals everything. This is actually related to a Greek concept called the pleroma, which again is a word for fullness or completeness. And when I try to sort of, every once in a while, you'll see there's a line in the Gospels where Jesus says that my joy may be within you and that your joy may be complete. The word he's actually using is pleroma. And the idea of completeness or fullness, the way I usually describe it is, if you imagine the volume of this space, or actually even better, if you imagine the heat coming up from our wonderful new heating system, it could be warm in here, but the fullness of warmth is where that warmth pushes to all of the corners and kind of stretches to the edge of it. That's the sense of 7. It's pushing the boundaries of what's big enough. So 6 is the number of incompleteness. Again, this is pretty logical. Why? Because 7 minus 1 is 6. So 6 is a mockery of 7. 6 is a bad number. And so if 6 is a bad number, 8 is the number of superabundance. Well, why is that? Because it's 1 more than 7. I mean, it's all sort of very logical, kind of silly, but logical. Feels a little bit Spinal Tap with that. So 8 is a very good number. 10 is another number of completeness. It's sort of it doesn't have the same kind of kind of philosophical cachet is 7, but why is 10 the number of completeness? Because we've got 10 fingers. 12 is a number that John comes back to an awful lot too. It's not really sort of a Roman number or a Greek number. This is a number that has particular resonance within the Judeo-Christian background. Why is that? 12 tribes of Israel. Also 12 apostles, which may or may not be Israel. It's a little bit complicated. So 1,000 and 10,000. It's so many things. I don't know what 1,000 things are, let alone 10,000 things. So thousands and tens of thousands are things beyond counting. Don't even bother counting. It's just, there's so many of these things. So if you think back to just the piece we just heard, Richard read, hopefully as we were hearing it, you sort of got the sense that there was sort of richness hiding behind it. But as you begin to sort of look at these numbers, you can see, going back to that lamb, how many horns does the lamb have? The lamb's got 7 horns. So we'll talk about horns in a moment. But you can begin to see, okay, there's this richness of imagery that's coming across. So in the packet, I talk about the description of those who had been marked with the seal. And I heard how many had been marked with the seal. 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. 12,000 from the tribe of Judah. So if you were to just kind of unlock this, what does that mean? What is 144,000? It's 12 times 12 times 1,000. Right. So what you get is, within each tribe is a whole Israel. Because you've got 12, which is 12 tribes, sitting inside of each tribe. So it's like Israel on top of Israel. And of that, times 1,000. So it's Israel on top of Israel, so many that you couldn't possibly count. It's not even worth counting at all. So that's how sort of numbers work. Now, when I did the packets, I completely forgot about the 4 humors. I don't know what was wrong with me, but I woke up last week and I was like, oh my gosh, the humors, I got to add the humors in. And I'm really glad I did, because they're really important. So this is a picture of a much later, this is I think a 17th century image of the 4 humors. And we all know the 4 humors, I'm sure. It's blood, which we think of as kind of sanguine. Phlegm, which is not actually phlegm. Phlegm was all of the white or clear liquids. So that included like the lymphatic system or saliva, or sort of anything in the body that was white or clear was phlegm. Yellow bile and black bile. Now, later on, we get this whole sort of system of humorism where we talk about, somebody who has a sanguine temperament is cheerful, and somebody who has, a melancholic temperament. That's actually much, much later. So that sort of sense of a kind of temperament is, if I remember correctly, I think it's as late as like the 14th and 15th century. So thousands of years after what John's doing. So the kind of classical sense of what the humors are doing is a little bit different. So we have to be careful not to export that. So the humors are associated with the 4 elements. Blood is associated with the element of air. Phlegm is associated with the element of water. Yellow bile is associated with the element of fire. Black bile is associated with the element of earth. Now, you may also have noted that those arrows are in cool little colors, because humors also have colors. Blood is red, phlegm is white, yellow bile is yellow or pale, and black bile is black. So what we get is anytime we see a color or a reference to an element, all of these things are circular. They're all cross-referential to each other. So any one of those things brings in all of that baggage. Colors, in turn, also can convey meaning. Red often conveys a sense of blood or violence. White is often used for victory. Yellow and pale is representative of sickness and death. And black is just bad. It's bad. There's a couple other colors that show up in the book of Revelation that are really important. And these are both colors and materials. So gold represents beautiful and valuable, and glass also represents beautiful and valuable. So you get glass and crystal and all these sorts of things. Glass itself could actually be used almost as a color. It can be used to describe a kind of opalescent, iridescent color. But just to give you a sense, these are two pieces of Roman glass that are, I believe, if I remember correctly, they're dated between the first century CE and the one on the right might be as late as the third century CE. So you can see very sophisticated use of color with glass, and also a lot of sophistication in terms of the production. But the one on the left, that kind of greenish opalescence, could often be used to describe the color of glass. Okay, I want to go through a bunch of miscellaneous images. And these are images which can come from the sort of broader apocalyptic tradition, but they're already represented in that apocalyptic tradition as well. So one is whenever you see clouds, particularly coming on the clouds or riding on the clouds, this is an indication of divinity. Comes out of the Psalms, comes out of the book of Daniel, comes in some other places as well. So whenever you see clouds and thunder or clouds and thunderbolts or things like that, these are clear indications of divinity. Probably very, very old images within the kind of the more Judeo-Christian perspective, probably focusing on the idea of sort of a very deep strata of God being a kind of a sky god kind of image. This is where there's sort of little threads that tie all the way back into very deep Near Eastern imagery. Juxtaposing the clouds, so the kind of the sky, is the sea. The sea is representative of primordial chaos. It is the antithesis of divine order. It is dangerous. It can destroy your ship. So the sea is everything that is opposed to the divine order of God is the sea. Also shows up in the abyss. So this is the core of what's behind the story of Jesus walking on the water or calming the waves or any of that. This is God showing, or Jesus showing, divine power over primordial chaos itself. So crowns and diadems. So crowns and diadems represent authority, particularly with a sense of political authority or the right to rule. So anybody who's got a crown has the right to rule. All three, the crown, the horn, and the throne are all very closely related, but subtly different. Horns represent power. They represent strength, often with a sense of military power. So conquest is associated with horns. That's different from diadems, which is the right to rule. And then the throne is the sort of the place of governance. So if you're going to put all three together, you're going to have somebody on a throne with a horn and a crown. So that's how you sort of put all the pieces together. We're going to see lots of that. Now, this is not unique to apocalyptic literature. John, Daniel, First Enoch, all these folks are relying on existing traditions. So here's an image of a coin of Antiochus I. So this is the great-great-grandfather of the guy who's the crisis around First Enoch and Daniel. But if you look at this coin, a couple things. First of all, he's got a diadem on. So it's a little circlet in this case. It's a little bit unclear what it is, but this is a mark of authority. So he's got the right to rule. And then in the back, so the obverse, you'd think, oh, that's a cow or a bull or something. That's actually not. It's a horse. But it is a horse with horns. So this is representative of the fact that he's got cavalry, and that cavalry is a big piece of his military power. So if we go back to what we talked about last week with the idea of hegemony and the idea of non-violent assertions of political or political power. So people who are using these coins have these symbols, and they're always seeing them. So you go to buy your lunch or whatever, and you pay with an Antiochus I, and then you flip it over, and you're reminded that you are under conquest by a cavalry. So this is another one. It's a little bit earlier This is a coin of Seleucus I. So this is the general who served under Alexander the Great. And here, he's got horns. Look at that. He's got that helmet with horns on. And then he also, because they're like, oh, well, weird animals have horns, so he's got weird ears too. I don't know why that. But then on the obverse, you've got an image of the goddess Victory crowning him with a diadem. So it's actually reversed. So when you look at what John is doing, he says, you got two horns, two puny little horns. We've got a lamb with 7 horns. Beat that. You can't, because there's no more horns. Although actually we'll have other people with more horns, but don't worry about that. You get 7 horns on our lamb. That's how this works. Okay, some additional images. Names. So these are images that are associated with personal identity. Names are a way of knowing who someone is. So names are sort of quote unquote important. We'll see there's a couple of places in the book of Revelation where we'll come to, I'm not sure we'll get to them necessarily, but where names come up. And they're always, whenever he discusses names, it's marked out. So we'll get to it when we talk about Babylon, or the image of Jesus at the end as the kind of the conqueror. It said that he has a name which no one knows. And the idea there is that if no one knows it, no one has power over him. His name that belongs to him alone. Whereas Babylon's got a name, we talk about Babylon all the time because we know Babylon's name, therefore we have power over it. Okay, we got heads. A lot of these weird beasties we're going to run into have lots and lots of heads. So heads typically represent the number of representatives in a class, typically the number of people. So if you've got a beast with 10 heads, it means that there's kind of a philosophical concept, which is the beast, but 10 people that fit into it. So 10 kings or 10, typically 10 kings is what it ends up being. So beast/animal represents a sense of wildness, which also comes into the sense of disorder or violence. We will also see an awful lot of, well, not awful, but a few hybrid beasts where you've got a leopard, but then you've got wings and it's got a weird tail or whatever. There's a great depiction, which I think we may get to next week, of these locusts, which are really not locusts and they look super duper weird. Whenever you have these hybrid beasts, you're talking about something that should not exist. It's about something which is unnatural and, again, a violation of the natural order. So an offense against God. We've talked about the images of number. They all fit together. So you've got heads, you've got 10 heads. What does 10 heads mean? It means completeness, all that sort of stuff. Just a quick thing to note, time is super duper slippery in apocalyptic literature. So an hour might be, not really an hour. A week might represent a century, or nobody even knows. So it's more about when you see units of time, it's about demarcating periods rather than identifying specific periods of time. When we get to how our conservative evangelical friends look at the book of Revelation, questions of how time gets ordered and understood become really critical. Okay, so this is the example that's in the packet. And this is where I really want to show how efficient the language in the book of Revelation is. That by using this incredibly complex lexicon of imagery, you can stack an enormous amount of meaning into a very small number of words. So, Revelation chapter 13, verse 1. Then out of the sea I saw a beast rising with 10 horns and 7 heads. On its horns were 10 diadems, and on each head a blasphemous name. So, what is the sea? The sea is primordial chaos. It's the thing which is kind of set against the order of God. What is a beast? A beast is a representative of violence and destruction. So I saw violence and destruction made present in the world, rising out of the place most opposed to God and God's will. It had unfathomable power, 10 horns, and all the rulers of the world were part of it. And through those rulers, it ruled. It ruled the whole world, and its nature, its names, its purpose was to take what rightfully belongs to God. That's blasphemy. It's to take what belongs to God. So, again, hopefully you can see this. It's just incredibly rich. Okay, the last piece I want to get into before we actually come back into another reading is to look at a couple of shared stories. One of them is the story we looked at last week. So the woman and the dragon from, if I remember correctly, Genesis chapter 12. So this is the woman who, standing on the moon, crowned with the stars, the great red dragon comes to eat the child. And again, this is clearly referencing Near Eastern religious stories, and in particular the story of Leto, Apollo, Artemis, and Python. This is particularly salient because in Asia Minor in particular, the cult of the divine emperor was closely associated with Apollo. So there's a sense of mocking that John brings in by taking the sacred stories of Apollo and saying, yeah, that story is true, but not your true, it's my true. So the story of Leto, Apollo, Artemis, and Python, just to go through it quickly, Leto is pregnant by Zeus. Apollo and Artemis are to be born. The great serpent monster Python comes to eat the children. Leto runs away to a safe space, which is what happens in the book of Revelation as well. Eventually, Apollo grows up, gets very grumpy that this serpent monster tried to attack mom, goes, kills Python. Python was the divine figure at the base of the oracle at Delphi. And so Apollo supplants Python to become the source of oracular knowledge in Delphi. The priestess at Delphi, if I remember correctly, is called Pythia for that reason. So what John's doing, taking their story, bringing it in, making it his own. But there's another really, really important story that pops up in a couple of really key references. And if you don't know it, tons of revelation make no sense at all. It's a story about a guy named Nero. So Nero's full name was Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. He was born 15 December 37, dies on 9 June 68. He succeeds Claudius at the age of 16. It's a little bit unclear. History's a little bit unclear on Nero, and there's some reasons why. Right now, there's a push in more contemporary classical scholarship to revisit whether or not Nero was hated or not. There's actually some peripheral evidence that he was actually quite popular, may have actually even been a populist. One of the key moments in the reign of Nero is the Great Fire, which takes place on the 18th and 19th of July in the year 64. Nero famously blames the Christians for this. Again, the historicity is a little bit unclear. There is a strong tradition that claims that it's during the Neronian persecution where Peter and Paul are both martyred. So the kind of great leadership of the church in Rome is lopped off. There appears to have been a fairly genuine, fairly substantial persecution of Christians in Rome, which was an incredibly critical center of Christianity, even by 68. So kind of political shenanigans ensue. He's killed by his secretary on the 9th of June. But this story supposes, what if he didn't really die? So either he didn't die, or maybe the gods brought him back from the dead. Maybe he fled to the east, to the great rival superpower of Rome, the Empire of Parthia. Maybe he will return to reclaim his rightful throne at the head of a massive Eastern army. Does this sound like a conspiracy theory? Yes, it does. But hey, there's actually people thought about this. So there's a set of texts we haven't really talked about, kind of Jewish Christian texts called the Sibylline Oracles. I know the Sibylline sounds very Greek, but trust me, they start Jewish. Christians get their paws on them. You get lots of edits. The Sibylline Oracles are very odd. But there are clear references to this story, and it's called the story either of Nero Redux, in other words, the return of Nero, or Nero Redivivus, Nero returned to life. So in the Sibylline Oracle, there's a line that says, "The exiled man of Rome, lifting a mighty sword, will cross the Euphrates with many tens of thousands." Now, we can use the same kind of analytical imagery. What's tens of thousands? So many troops. You can't even imagine how many troops it is. What's a sword? Military power. Now, Dio Chrysostom, in his orations, actually refers to this belief. Even now, all long for him, which is interesting. If everyone hated him, why is he saying that the common people seem to want him? All long for him to be alive. Indeed, many think he is actually still alive. So, the story of Nero Redivivus is key in here. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more a little bit later. But now I'd like to go, and so now that we have kind of unlocked pieces of this code, we'll do, the next reading is going to be the beginning of, I believe it's chapter 6, starting with verse 1. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the first four seals. So you can follow along chapter 6, verse 1 if you want, or you can just allow yourself to have it come over you. Here we go.
Then I saw on the right hand of the one seated on the throne a scroll with writing inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaim with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" But there was no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth to open the scroll or to look inside it. And I wept bitterly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look inside it. But one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep." I watched as the Lamb broke the first of the 7 seals, and heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." And there, as I watched, was a white horse, and its rider held a bow. He was given a crown, and he rode out, conquering and to conquer. When he broke the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, blood red. Its rider was given power to take away peace from the earth, that people might slaughter one another, and he was given a great sword. When he broke the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd creature say, "Come." And there, as I watched, was a black horse, and its rider held in his hand a pair of scales. And I heard what sounded like a voice from among the 4 living creatures say, "A quart of wheat for denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, but do not harm the oil and wine." When he broke the 4th seal, I heard the 4th creature say, "Come." And there, as I watched, was a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed with him. They were given power over a quarter of the earth, to kill by sword and famine, by pestilence and wild beasts.
Okay. So when we look at this passage, hopefully, as the various numbers and the various things sort of popped up, little things began to kind of trigger. So looking at the very first of the horsemen, so the first thing we notice, 7 seals. So what does that mean? It's a perfect number. So we've got a fullness question. So the 7 seals. This is the very, very beginning of what we are going to kind of probably call what we think of as the revelation part, all the bad stuff that happens, right? So what we have in this scroll is the divine plan. And we have, so if you think back all the way back to week 1, where we talked about the literary structure, the 7 seals, we go through the 7th, and then the 7 trumpets are actually embedded in the 7 seals. So we've begun this cascade of 7s. So we have the first one. One of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder. So now we've got some cloud stuff going on. We've got some incorporation of kind of the divine presence. By the way, going back to that image of the Ancient of Days on the throne and the Lamb and all these people, what John is laying out is the image of what would be a Near Eastern imperial court, not Rome, but actually much more in line with what would have happened under the Seleucids or in Parthia. So he's actually using these Near Eastern images to describe what a divine throne room looks like. So he says, so you get this, the voice like a thunder. We've got a white horse. Now, what does that mean? It's a symbolism of victory, right? And watch this. This is, remember, John is super careful about his language. He was given a crown. Note the passive voice there. He doesn't have it on his own. He is given it because this is part of the divine plan. And what is he given? He's given a crown. So he's given the right to rule. Last thing, what does he have in his hand? He's got a bow. Okay, so what is this? What's going on here? So John tells us what he's doing. Earlier on in Revelation 1, verse 19, Jesus says to him, write down therefore what now is and what is to take place hereafter. 2 different time periods. Now, he never goes back and says when he's talking about what is now, or what's hereafter. But here we've got a clue. The 4 horsemen, how many are there? 4. Where is 4? 4 is here. So what we're talking about with these 4 horsemen is probably a sense of what's happening now. It's a little hard to tell, but it's part of the imagery that he's using. Okay, so Rome and Parthia. It's a little bit hard to tell what's going on here. I've got some circles. So the blue circle right there, that's Ephesus. So that's right in the neighborhood of where John is. Ephesus is about 800 miles away from Rome. And it's about a little over 1,000 miles to, I don't even know how to pronounce that Parthian name, Ctesiphon. It's basically Baghdad. Ephesus is less than 700 miles from the border with Parthia. Most of the Roman Empire has natural borders. The kind of, apart from that little bit up in Britannia, they've got shoreline, or they've got the Sahara Desert, or they've got the Danube, or they've got the Rhine, or they've got the Alps. What, sorry? The Alps, right. The problem with Parthia is all they've got is a fairly easy to traverse desert. So there is no clear natural boundary between Rome and Parthia. So they're always fighting. And sometimes Parthia wins, and it's not pretty for the Romans. So the Parthians really are the boogeyman for the Romans. Here's a kind of a detail of where this is. So, Ephesus is again, it's about 700 miles from Palmyra. Here's a picture of what the Romans looked at what the Parthians were like. So the Parthians' technological advantage was that they had mounted archers. Fun fact, they had this thing where they would run up, they would shoot a bunch of arrows at you, and then they would run around, and then they would turn around and run away. And much like the Mongols, they actually had they could turn around on their horse and shoot one more shot as they went away, and that's where we get the English word parting shot. Okay, so now let's look at the rest of those horsemen. So we have a blood red horse for the second one, given a great sword. Again, an image of military strength and power. The third one, black horse. This is a bad thing. He's got a pair of scales. Just a couple of things I really want to kind of highlight here. You'll see this as we move along. The stories of bad things happening get worse and worse. And so when John leaves incomplete badness, that's intentional. So in this case, he says a quart of wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. So he's saying you're not starving to death. It's just that inflation is terrible, but you still have oil and wine. So the fourth one, this is a pale horse, and now he's given power over a quarter of the earth, not the whole earth. A quarter of the earth. And he's given the power to kill by sword and famine, by pestilence and wild beasts. So before we dig into the last bit, I want to stop for questions. I want to take just a moment. Do people want to take a short break? It got very cold in here because I think the timer for the heating went off. So I'm going to go turn the heater on. Think of your questions. We'll come to some questions and we'll do the last bits of images. So any questions at this point?
Michael, Steve Peters here.
Excellent. And then we'll get you, Annie. Yes.
Just 2 things about Nero. He was very popular with the people because he really focused on the arts, music, public buildings, and actually public housing. And when he died, there were Nero impersonators would go around, much like Elvis, the rock star. People thought, and some people did think that he was still alive.
Yeah,
I mean, it was.
Yeah, I know. I didn't mention it, but you're right. There were a couple of them, and they helped give rise to this idea of Nero redivivus.
The other thing that Nero did blaming the Christians, he was the first one, or one of the first ones, to specifically differentiate Christians from Jews.
Yep.
So Christianity just was no longer a Jewish sect; it was separate. And it was a backhanded compliment, if you will.
And that separation between Christianity and Judaism isn't really complete until the early part of the 2nd century. So Annie, get you the get them make sure you get the microphone here.
Hi, Holly. I wondered whether Nero was really dead or if he was the forerunner of Christ. Anyway, we'll just let that.
It would have been after, but
well, anyway,
but the idea of resurrection stories, not entirely unique to Christianity. You know, you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah. The other thing is we never said anything about the 7 and 6. Is this wives' tale or what?
The 7.
I always thought 7 was the number of God and 6 was the devil, and we have all these 7 things, and I always assumed that everything that was 7 probably belonged to God.
You are absolutely right. 7 belongs to God because God has governance over everything.
Well, except over 6.
Yeah, we'll get to 6 later.
All right.
Because
Susan?
Just to bring us up to where things really were with Nero, he did kill his mother.
Oh, probably.
You know, I'm really not sure, Annie, whether we want to make too close a reference to a risen Christ.
Okay.
He not only killed his mother, he tried to kill her, and she swam away from the boat he had put her in to drown her.
Right. Okay.
So he had to send. So he was really serious about taking.
I want to be as
I will say no more.
Distant and skeptical about Nero as possible. So here's what I want to say. Nero had 2 strikes. I actually had a couple slides about this, but I took them out. But we're doing okay for time. Nero has his reputation has two huge strikes against him. Number one, the Christians hated him. Okay, so that's number one. So the other thing is that his political enemies after he died hated him. So a lot of the writing that happened immediately after, or like that happens during the Flavians, during Trajan, Titus, and Domitian, is incredibly anti-Nero. Okay, now, so Christianity remembers Nero as horrible. You fast forward all the way into the 17th and 18th century, and all the classicists start rediscovering things and retranslating things and coming up with great new translations of Suetonius. And sure enough, they discover the fact that the Romans hated Nero too. So this is why it actually, you're right, Susan, all these folks are horrible. They're all doing horrible things. But you can actually bring a little bit of skepticism to some of the sources.
Yes. But he still killed his mother.
And yet he killed his mother.
And yet he did.
George, let's get you the microphone.
I want to mention that I heard on the Lake of Garda people talking about Mussolini with tears in their eyes. When were the good old days going to come back? That's a reference to good old Nero. Is he going to be revived, and is he going to come back?
Absolutely.
So maybe Mussolini was...
Any other comments, questions? Ms. Tuck?
I have the microphone. So this is like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, right?
It is. This is literally the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
From what I've heard elsewhere about them, it seems like a lot more itemized and like this is the one for war and this is the one for pestilence. And here it's like, oh, they were all given this power, and it's not quite so like avatars of these things.
You're absolutely correct. And again, if we come back to really thinking about what the significance of the four is, what we see is a description of what is happening now. So if we were to, and this is a little bit of a preview of where we might take this a little bit later in our time together. But if we say, okay, actually, I'm going to go back to that slide. So what do we have? We have a great empire that threatens us militarily. Well, I mean, take 2,000 years of history, drop a pin in it. You know, any region in the world, any time period, and those people would say, "Oh yeah, those guys, they're real scary over there." It's the Soviet Union, it's China, it's you pick whichever one you want. But that sort of that fear is always present, and so there's always a rider on a white horse. And again, look around the world. Is there war happening? Show me a time when there wasn't. There's always the red horse. Now the third one is really interesting because here we're introducing a theme, and this is another difficult issue for us in 2025 to kind of get our heads into where they are. What he's talking about here with the pair of scales is economic exploitation. It's the problem here is that it costs too much for food. And now to the extent that oil and wine are, when you look at, and it's interesting because when you look at the Psalms and look at the Old Testament, the indication of God's favor is when there is an abundance of three products: grain, wine, and oil. So it's not that there's a complete elimination of God's presence and abundance, because we still have wine and oil, and they were kind of staples, but they're staples in a different category from grain. It's different from bread. And again, if we're going to suppose that John is not on drugs and not some weird little hick, but in fact an upper middle class, well-educated person who gets what's going on, he knows that what drives the Roman Empire are the grain ships from Egypt. that it's all about the way that grain moves, and that's what creates the political stability of the empire. And so he's pointing out that there's instability at the core of the empire around access to bread. So he's incredibly clear about this. And again, that's John in his context with that. But again, look at the timeline, drop a pin in it anywhere in the world. Can you look to a way in which there is the potential exploitation of the poor around the things that they absolutely need? Sure, you can always find that. And then at the end, you get death by sword, by famine, by pestilence, by wild beasts. Those are kind of visceral fears that we have. Those are always present for us. Just the other day, on Tuesday when we were meeting with the Lennox leaders, we were all talking about the bear that comes through here. I grew up in the suburbs outside of Philadelphia. I don't like bears. This is creepy to me. There's wild beasts that are actually going through my trash. I don't like this. And here we have the pale horse. So, and this is where we get back to the question of how we read either scripture or something like Revelation. Is it entirely located in the past as a cultural document? Does it speak timeless truths? Is it somewhere in between? Can it be both of those things? Within the church, that's where we look at the question of inspiration, mediation, and interpretation. Any other questions? Get yourself a microphone there, Stephanie. Absolutely. I mean, how can we get off from Nero? Yes.
Well, the Romans hate him, the Christians hate him. Why? And that's nonsense of him fiddling around while Rome burns. Where does that come from?
I'm looking over here to Susan and Steve. I believe the fiddling when Rome burns. So Nero did he did see himself as an actor, and he this is part of why he may have had a real populist position. He went to the theater, which was considered inappropriate for someone of his status. In fact, I think he even acted. He may have done some chariot driving as well. So he's very, very man of the people. So I believe it's in Suetonius' Lives of the 12 Caesars, where he's described as the kind of a dilettante and not really engaged, and so much so that he's playing the lyre while Rome burns. Suetonius. Oh, because I am right on the edge of everything I know because I'm not a classicist. I'm a medievalist. But if I remember correctly, Suetonius's patrons were the Flavians, which are the emperors that followed Nero, and they were the first emperors who could not claim direct descendancy from Julius Caesar, and so they had a real political instability to them. So it was in their interests to show the decadence and collapse of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. But he still killed his mother, Susan.
He most assuredly did.
Or according to Suetonius.
But she wasn't exactly.
They're all terrible.
I mean, by the time you get into that group, you are really, it's like Knives Out. It's
right.
Really, they are all looking for each other,
Could you get the microphone to Joe? There's one more thing I wanted to say. So the Christians hated him because of the persecution in 64. The other Romans hated him for completely independent reasons having to do with politics in mid to late first century Rome. Joe?
Thank you, Michael. So when you look at the four horsemen, for example, the question of time isn't entirely clear. Is this the current situation, or is it kind of, this is always the current situation at all points in time whenever you might be looking at this? But I'm taking it that in the larger context, all of this is part of God's overall plan. Mm-hmm. These terrible things are happening now. They've probably always been happening. They're going to be happening in the future. And they're all a dimension of God's overall perfect plan.
And that's, yes. And you're beginning to point to what's going to be a really, really difficult piece of our analysis around how is it that bad things are part of God's plan. And you'll see John does a lot of bobbing and weaving, a lot of passive voice, a lot of, and and it's important. We won't get to it for probably another 2 weeks before we get to John's central thesis about what is the Christian response to this environment. So I think there's actually something valuable about our understanding of like the images like the four horsemen by going back to what John's doing. So he's writing to these 7 churches. Oh, 7 again! Look at that. And he's starting out with what he's saying with the four horsemen is, this is where we are. Look around. You know it. We know it. We all know it. This is the circumstance that we're in. We got Parthia over here. They're super scary. We've got not enough money to buy the food that we need. We've got bad conditions and disease outbreaks in our cities. We've got, the threat of war and violence in our streets. Like that's, now, whether or not that's actually entirely true, historically is a totally different problem. But that's very much how the Christian communities are seeing the world around them. So he's beginning to lay out an argument around here's where we are, and then what it's going to turn into is, and here's what you need to do, and then it's going to end with, and here's how it's going to end up. And so we're starting out, and so the seals in particular are describing a sense of where we are now. All right.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on real quickly to gemstones. Gemstones, boundary between medicine and magic, very permeable. Gemstones were thought to have beneficial properties. So Galen actually has a whole section on stones and medicine. Other people are like, those guys are weird. We don't really believe in that. So the best source that I could find easily, it was really hard. I couldn't find Galen. It was a thing. Is I got some stuff from Pliny. And so here's just 4 examples of what Pliny talks about. A lot of these stones don't appear in Revelation, although amethyst does. But it gives you a sense of just this idea that there's a richness behind the stones. So amber was a protective stone for infants, good for all sorts of things. Also, if I remember correctly, amber was also good for urinary disorders because it sort of looks like urine. So diamonds are good for poison. Citrine is good for jaundice. Again, it sort of looks like jaundice. And amethysts were against drunkenness. So in Greek, a is a negative prefix. It's called an alpha privative. Methys means drunk. So amethyst literally means not drunk. So here's some examples of what they actually look like. There were these little amulets that can be used as seal stones. So your doctor might give you a tonic and then might take a stone and press it up against your liver or kidney or whatever. And that's supposed to help you. Here's another one. I like this one. It's a little hard to see. It's a reaper. It's an image of a reaper cutting. And it was used for back pain because if you're out in the field cutting stuff and you get home and you're going to have back pain. So you stick it on your back's better. Now, I bring this up again just to kind of give you a sense of that gemstones are in the mix. I couldn't track down what all those stones in Revelation are. I found one of the things is particularly if you're doing internet research and you look at medicine and gemstones, boy, you get all sorts of stuff. It's really hard to find anything in antiquity or anything that has any academic substance to it whatsoever. There's lots of stuff about crystals. But I did see some oblique references to jasper being a stone that was sort of associated with God for some reason. And again, if you remember back, he's always looking at the stone and saying, I saw one that looked like the Ancient of Days, that looked like jasper or cornelian. Then when we get to the end where we get the description of the heavenly city, it's going to be streets of gold. There's going to be glass everywhere. Each of the gates, you've got pearly gates. Each of the foundation stones is a different gemstone. He's incredibly clear about which ones they are. It must have had meaning for his original audience. We just don't quite have it.
I don't think they had diamonds then.
Yeah.
How did they get them?
So the question is, how do they get diamonds? I don't recall. When you look at Pliny or some of these other sources, they actually describe where they're getting them from. They say, we get them from the East, or we get them from Africa, or we get them from other places. So they to cut them, but they may be able to find them uncut. Yeah, but there were. I mean, they appear in riverbeds and stuff. There's places where they show up. Yep. So, quick look at kind of the cosmology. Again, it's not as explicit in Revelation, but it's in his worldview. It's in his backdrop. So the model that John is using is the Aristotelian geocentric model. Later on, this will become what we know of as the Ptolemaic model. The Ptolemaic model includes, interestingly, a lot of math to fix problems in the Aristotelian model. So Aristotle is actually refuting various Pythagoreans and also Plato. So in his treatise on the heavens, it's kind of not polemical, but he's kind of laying out things in opposition to other people. So, by the way, they knew the Earth was a sphere. They could see that it was a round shape that was getting in between the sun and the moon. They could actually see through lunar eclipses that it was actually a round thing that was coming across. They also could evaluate curvature. They were able to calculate not completely incorrectly the vague size of the Earth as well. I think they may have actually had it better than Columbus did. So the heavens are divided basically into two portions. There's a lot of discussion of what we call the sublunar, so below the moon, that's the Earth. And then they would call the seven heavens. It's actually a little bit more complicated than that. So seventh heaven meaning the best. So the further away you get from here and now, which is imperfect, the more perfect you get, the best you get. So heavenly bodies are all perfect, and they're made of this fifth element called ether. And the motion is, of course, circular, because circles are perfect. Now, problem is, we now know because of Kepler, the motion is not circular at all. And so there were math problems. This is part of what Ptolemy was trying to clean up when he did his thing in the 2nd century. So earthly bodies are subject to generation and corruption. And that's because they are made of the 4 elements. So fire, air, water, earth. This later gets kind of overlaid with aspects of Christian theology, and that gets becomes the foundation of what becomes the geocentric model that is in place all the way up until Galileo. So this is a picture of one of those later cosmologies, and you can see kind of in the middle there, there's the sublunar portion. And you can kind of make it out. The highest level is fire, and then you have air underneath it, and water and earth. But then outside of it, you can see there's the moon, Mercury, all the 7 planets. This cute little band of the stars. That's lovely. And then the zodiac's in there because that's the movement of the stars and the way they move around. And then at the very end, you've got the prime mover, and then that's described as the imperial heaven, the dwelling of God, and all the elect. That's what that Latin bit is around the outside. So this is much later. This is, I think, early 17th century. So the sublunar is where we live, and that's the fire, air, water, and earth. And that brings us all the way back to the colors, which brings us back to the humors, which brings us back to all the sets of imagery, all the pieces that John's working with. So, how many seals are there? 7. And what did we just have? We had 4 horsemen. So how many do we have left? 3 is the number of perfection. So watch what happens next, and we're going to get the last bit of the 7 seals.
When he had broken the 5th seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slaughtered for the word of God and for the testimony they bore. They cried aloud, "How long, Master, holy and true, must it be before you pronounce judgment and avenge our blood on the inhabitants of the earth?" Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to rest for a little while longer until the number of their fellow servants and brothers and sisters who were to be killed as they themselves had been was completed. I watched as he broke the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black as hairy sackcloth, and the moon all red as blood. The stars in the sky fell to earth as a fig tree shedding its unripe figs when shaken by a gale. The sky was torn apart like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was dislodged from its place. Then the kings of the earth, the nobles and commanders, the rich and the powerful, and every slave and freedman, hid themselves in the caves or under mountain crags, and they cried to the mountains and to the crags, "Fall on us and hide us from the one who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand?" After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth so that no wind should blow on land or sea or on any tree. I saw another angel ascend from the rising of the sun, holding the seal of the living God, and he cried aloud to the 4 angels who had been given power to devastate land and sea, "Do not devastate land and sea or trees until we have set the seal of our God on the foreheads of his servants." And I heard how many had been marked with the seal. 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel, 12,000 from the tribe of Judah, 12,000 from the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 from the tribe of Gad, 12,000 from the tribe of Asher, 12,000 from the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000 from the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 from the tribe of Simeon, 12,000 from the tribe of Levi, 12,000 from the tribe of Issachar, 12,000 from the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 from the tribe of Joseph, 12,000 from the tribe of Benjamin. After this, I looked, and there was a vast throng, which no one could count, from all nations and tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and the Lamb, robed in white and with palm branches in their hands. They were shouting aloud, "Victory to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." And the angels who stood round the throne and the elders and the 4 living creatures fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, crying, "Amen. Praise, glory, and wisdom, thanksgiving and honor, power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen." Then one of the elders spoke to me and asked, "These people robed in white, who are they and where have they come from?" I answered, "My Lord, it is you who know." He said to me, "They are those who have passed through the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. That is why they stand before the throne of God and worship him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will be their tabernacle. They shall not hunger any more, or thirst any more. Never again shall the sun strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb who is at the center of the throne will shepherd them, and will guide them to springs of the water of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." When the Lamb broke the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour.
So, anything jumped out? Have to pass microphones around.
$44,000 becomes amplified into countless numbers.
I'm glad you saw that, George, because you're right. Because there's a little magic trick that John does, and it's oops, sorry about this. I stepped on the camera and made it sad. So there's a magic trick that John does, and it's one of the ways that he constructs these paradoxes. So watch this very closely. He will juxtapose what he hears with what he sees. And I'm told, who can open the scroll? And the angel says, the Lion of Judah can open the scroll. And I looked and I saw a lamb. The lion is the lamb. That's the metaphor. And I heard the number that were sealed, 144,000. And I looked and saw a great throng. So he's to watch for that. He does it over and over again. It's one of his tricks. Annie, you got something?
Well, no, it's just a question. It sounded like this was given to the 12 tribes, and not to the Christians.
You remember when Steve said that the persecution under Nero was the first time the Christians were differentiated, and I said the differentiation isn't really complete until the early 2nd century. This goes back to this idea that for John and John's community, it's really unclear what they think of themselves. So they are probably law observant people who believe that Jesus is the divine Messiah. So they may still think of themselves as Jews.
Well, they're the 12 houses of Israel.
It's could very well be. This is very complicated.
You just told us that.
Yes. Well, yeah, they were.
They just told us that.
But here's the tricky bit. So he's saying there's 144,000 from the tribes of Israel, which, by the way, is not the right list.
But they say 12 tribes.
The
Starting
12 tribes.
with Judah.
Yeah, the tribe of Ephraim and the tribe of Gad are not in the list. Who knows what's going on there. In fact, the scholars have absolutely no idea why he chooses this different list. It's very odd. But he hears they're all from the tribe of Israel. He sees that they're from every nation and language. It can't both be true exactly. And so we're left with this very sort of unsettled bit. What my hypothesis would be is that in this phase of Christianity's development, again, they're unclear whether or not this is sort of a new religion or not, but there are ways of incorporating people into Jewish Christianity. So you can be a Gentile who becomes a Christian, and then that incorporates you in some way into the 12 tribes of Israel. Also got to say, how many elders are there? There's 24 elders. What's 24? 12 times 2. 12 patriarchs, 12 apostles. Maybe they're somehow squashed together. Stephanie, let's get the microphone over to you.
A couple of questions. The math, that 12,000 keeps coming up over and over again. And is this the 6th seal that we're talking about, that the Lamb was opening?
The 6th. So the 6th seal, which is that one.
Is that the one that says it's the end of things, but it's not the end, and then it's not the end is near?
Do you remember way back in week 1 where we talked about one way of thinking about Revelation is the idea of this circular pattern that keeps coming back?
Right.
That's what we got. We have what appears to be the first description of, and now God solved everything. And now we're going to restart the whole process all over again. So there's a spiraling effect that we're seeing. So the 6th seal appears to be okay, and now everything's been accomplished.
Except that at the end there's a half hour. And what is going on with that?
Nobody knows. It's so weird. But you've got so much going on in heaven where it's always about and we're singing this and we're singing that. But you can kind of get where he's going. when you think about those moments in church where it's, it's loud and bombastic and all this sort of stuff, and then suddenly there's silence, and it's a different space of liturgy to be in a space of silence. It's very odd, and half an hour, nobody has any idea why it's half an hour, and it's such a strangely specific time. So weird. George?
I know this is completely out in left field, but could that half hour be the breath of Christ as he dies,
Oh.
and the silence that descends upon earth? The curtains are
Oh, yeah, I like that. And actually, you've got, I'm going to have to check because I do not remember. Is it the earthquake in John? Does anybody remember? We're all Episcopalians and none of us know our Bible. Well, actually, it doesn't even matter because we're not sticking within the Johannine tradition. We know that John of Patmos is in dialogue with he knows Mark, he's in dialogue with John, he's in dialogue with Matthew, he's in dialogue with Luke. So he's familiar with these traditions. I love where you're going with that, George, because there's an earthquake, there's the rending of the temple, the veil of the temple, and then you've got that sense of silence. You've got and what's happening in Seal 5? You've got an earthquake, but then the other thing I want to point out about Seal 5. So notice how you've got the four horsemen that are happening here. When you get to the fifth seal, notice where the camera moves. We're back up in heaven. We're now seeing the martyrs under the altar, which is weird. But we're back up in heaven. Yeah, we've got the image of that. So we're back up in heaven. The sun is darkened. Where is the sun? It's in heaven. The moon turns red. Where is the moon? It's in heaven. And then where are the 144,000? They're worshiping God before their throne. They've somehow been transported up into heaven, and they're now part of the heavenly court. So we've got 4 things that happen here and 3 things that happen there. He knows exactly what he's doing. It's amazing. Any other questions? It's a very strange picture. Well, yeah, and they've got the little white things. I also like over on the right-hand side, that guy who's he's being given a stole. That's super weird. We may have to come back to this later when we look at how Revelation's received throughout the church. There's a bunch of other sort of weird stuff going on here. You probably picked it up, this idea that every new martyr gets us one step closer to the end, which is a super strange idea. It probably relating to the idea that within John's community, they really, really expected Jesus to be back like tomorrow. So it's fine. If a couple more people die, it's not, well, I was about to say it's not the end of the world, but maybe it is. So, all right. So for next week, the plan was to look at the seals and to look at the throne room, that bit from Revelation chapter 4, but we've already covered that. But we're going to start by looking at the letters. So we're going to go back and do a close look at the letters. So if you could review chapters 3 and 4, I believe are the letters. And then I think, since we're going to have some more time, we'll do a similar exercise where I don't think it's going to be read, so we may have people read it here. But I want to look at kind of the rest of the kind of the run up to the middle. So again, if there's this, if there's an overarching sense of what John's doing, there's where we are now, there's the central thesis and proposition, and then there's a where we're going. So I'd like to kind of finish up where we are now, and that's going to be primarily chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11. So it doesn't have to be a close read, but those are probably what we're going to end up with, and I'll apologize in advance if we end up doing something a little different. So thank you guys so much. This was really, really fun, really lovely. Have a great afternoon, everyone.